Hi, I'm Kim Essendrup, project manager, trainer, and coach.
And I'm Kate Anderson, recovering project manager, aspiring product manager. Together, we co-host the Project Management Happy Hour podcast, the place for frank and honest talk about real-world issues in project management.
And on our podcast, we really like to talk about those gritty, tough situations that we face as project managers, which don't always have an easy ending.
And as both real-world project managers and giant fans of fantasy stories, we've seen hundreds of situations that bring us to the edge of our seats, whether we're in the audience or at times driving a project.
Right. And so the theme for this year's Mile Hi Symposium, Diamonds Made Under Pressure, really resonated with us because as project managers, we are often out there on the front line implementing changes that are critical for our organizations. And when you're out there driving projects, driving change, and pushing the capabilities of your organization, well, things go wrong sometimes in our projects. And sometimes they feel like the end of the world kind of wrong.
And when that end of the world moment hits, you're in complete project crisis mode. The moment that happens and how you respond to it, that moment is career defining.
So I have a story about a project that went terribly wrong.
Oof.
It was my project, unfortunately. And it went so wrong that my project actually brought down the entire call center, all agents for a global bank.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it was not a good time. And so I was there in a fishbowl. You know what a fishbowl is?
I do not.
Okay. So a fishbowl is a conference room where it's glass on all sides. And I was there with my engineer the morning after we went live. When the first time you start taking phone calls into our call center, we'd spent the whole week working with the team, implementing our technology, getting ready for this big morning when we go live and phone calls start to come into our system for the first time.
Yes, the moment, the moment you're waiting for.
The moment. And in that moment, we were kind of on display. We were in this glass fishbowl of a conference room, and we could see everywhere across the call center. I could see rows of call center agents this way, rows of call center agents this way. And at the end of each row was a call center supervisor, and we got to know them. They came in, we talked, and that morning everybody's coming in and they're saying hi to us, and we're like, hi, it's going to be the big day. We're going to go live. It's going to be great. And all behind us was a row of offices where all the vice presidents were.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. They were having their donuts and their coffee, and they were doing pretty well. And so we go live, and what we had on our display in the overhead projector was a readout that showed all the phone lines. So I could see every call that came into the call center. Mm-hmm. Light turns green. Some nice call center agent here picks up the phone. Can I help you? And so I could see the phone lines starting to fill up in the morning, and we're having our coffee, and Marco, my engineer, and I were feeling pretty good about the world.
Yeah, that sounds like a great launch. I'm really curious about how it goes badly.
Yeah, and it did. So I was sitting there watching the phone lines, and then I saw one of them turn red. Boop. I thought, well, that's weird.
A little weird.
Why does it say red? That's not good. Is it, Marco? Red's not good, right? And so another one goes red. Boop. Another one. Boop, boop. Brrr. Hundreds of phone lines going red. Locked. And I look over into the call centers over here, and I see the agents, and they're looking at their phones like this, and they're talking to their supervisors. And I look this way, and the same thing. All the agents are putting down their phones, and they're standing up looking at the supervisors, and they're all looking at us in the fishbowl.
Oh, boy.
And I could tell by what was going on that every time that happened, all the lines were locked. People were not able to call into the global bank's call centers.
Oh, no.
And so then I look over my shoulder, and I start to see the offices open up. All the vice presidents start coming up, and they start coming to us in the fishbowl.
To you.
To us in the fishbowl. And whether or not you've been in a situation like this or not, even if you're not in a physical fishbowl like we were in, it feels like you're in a fishbowl. And I just stood and watched as they all came and opened up the door and said, what is going on?
This is your crisis moment. The moment when the world falls down around you and you just feel helpless. So today we're going to talk about how you can handle this. You can handle yourself. You can state the facts, communicate in headlines, and be predictable. These tools will help you survive and, dare I say, thrive in this project crisis moment and bring your team back stronger together. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here is how you can handle this. That moment one, all the eyes have turned towards you in the fishbowl, either Kim's fishbowl or your metaphorical fishbowl, and you feel the sweat run down your back, your breath gets small, you feel like you can't even breathe in that moment. So the first thing we want to do is support ourselves in that moment. You can do this.
Absolutely. And so I study a pretty obscure martial art. It's called Balintawak, and our podcast listeners have heard probably more about that than they want to. But one of the things that we teach in that is that the first step, the first thing you learn when you learn a martial art like that, especially when you have a weapon of some kind, is that you have to first control yourself and your weapon so you don't hurt yourself or your training partners. And the same thing kind of applies here.
Absolutely. So for you, you're going to want to breathe, take a deep breath, inhale and exhale. Feel your feet, stay grounded, be present in this moment. The last thing that you want to do is feel like your foundation goes out from underneath you and you start to turn into the groveling, panicky project manager. I'm so sorry. I'm the worst project manager. I'll give you my whole salary to make sure it fixes this. It's okay. Under no circumstances do we want to turn into that project manager in that moment.
And it's true, because that's kind of what your urge is. You feel like your project has done something terrible and you feel bad about it. You wanted everything to go well, and maybe everything has gone well up until this moment. And as the person responsible for the project, you can feel pretty awful. But the key is, you don't grovel here, don't jump into apologies. That's not what they want to hear. Your sponsors and stakeholders want to hear that you're under control, that you have a plan, that you're going to help set things right.
Exactly. Another key thing to make sure that you don't do here, another under no circumstances, is throwing people under the bus. As confident as you may be that somebody has messed up in this moment, marriage has taught me that people live beyond moments where they feel deep emotions or deep panic feelings. So even though at that moment you don't feel like you can forgive this person who potentially has bugged the system or forgotten to do something, remind yourself, I will live through this moment. And what you say can be repeated later. So if you don't have anything good to say, don't say it yet.
Right. And really, to talking about whether you're apologizing when you maybe shouldn't, or blaming somebody when you certainly shouldn't, at this stage in your crisis, it's probably too early to even really know what's going on. Even though you're sure it's going to be Todd G, your architect, you're sure he did something wrong. This early into the crisis, you don't know. You don't have all the facts. So just stick with the facts right now, stay factual, and don't play the blame game.
Exactly. So what you want to do whenever you only have the facts in front of you is neither over nor under promise here. You want to state what you know, and you want to state it confidently, clearly, and slowly. And don't fear the silence after the pause. I think we have a great example of you in the fishbowl talking about what happened next.
Back to the fishbowl. Was not my favorite place at the time.
Understandable.
But as the executives came in, rightfully demanding to know what was going on with the very expensive call center solution that we had just implemented for them, the first thing I did was breathe.
Yes.
I don't recall specifically breathing, but I'm sure I did it. The key thing is that I checked myself. I worked with my team to understand exactly where we were going. I was checking with my engineer, Marco, to see what was the status of the servers, what exactly was it we were seeing. And first thing I did was I acknowledged to the executive. I said, yes, we know that there is a problem. And I provided leadership in that moment. Even though I didn't know where to lead them, I didn't know what to do. The one thing I did know is I had to say I needed 5 minutes to get clarity on the situation. And when I communicated, what was really important as part of that communication is that I mirrored the gravity of the situation and the urgency, but not the emotion.
Critical.
So I let them know that I understood how urgent the situation was, not just by my words, but that I reflected that in my communication. But I kept my emotion undercover, because it's hard for my sponsors and your sponsors to believe in you that you're going to solve their problem if you get very emotional, I guess.
Absolutely. And how was that received when you responded with the gravity of the situation, with what you knew? I need 5 minutes, something is wrong. Really simple, small answers, but mirroring that gravity, projecting confidence and leadership.
Well, they were not happy. Their call center went down.
It didn't fix it?
But They understood that there was a plan, that I was going to do something to help solve their problem, and they did. They did follow that. They did give us 5 minutes of quiet time to figure out what was going on, and I think that it helped them as well to quell their immediate fears and concerns, to know that we were on top of it and we were looking into it.
And that's a big insight for, we would call this moment 2, right? We've made it through moment 1 where you handle yourself, and now we're trying to provide leadership in handling others. So you can handle them too. And what's really important to note here is that what's happened is we've lost control of the situation. I think as project managers, we all know the folly of our job is the false sense of control that we try to have over most situations whenever we know that we manage things like risks that ultimately can turn into issues. So we're not in control of everything, but in a crisis situation, we really feel that loss of control. So the most upsetting thing here is that not just you feel powerless, but so do your sponsors, your team, and our goal here is to restore confidence.
That's right. So what's going on for your sponsors, your stakeholders, and all your customers in this situation when you've had a project disaster is they feel powerless. They feel like they've had a loss of confidence. And as a result of all that, they have lost trust that you might have spent months or years trying to build with them. And when you lose that trust, it's harder to get things done because you want to proceed with a course of action and you're going to get questioned. You're not going to have the trust you need maybe to get the situation rectified.
Yes, uncertainty is high, consequences are unknown, or at times they are known, right? There are certainly some companies that know for every second that a particular system is down, that they lose a certain amount of dollars per moment. If you work at a bar and you're not able to take cards at your point of sale system, that certainly means a loss of revenue for a certain amount of time. Maybe people would choose a different bar to go to if they're not at your location and they're not taking cards. So there's a known issue, there's a known consequence at times, which potentially your sponsors are rushing out of those rooms to look at you, feeling the pressure of the mounting amount of fallout that's coming from this known issue that you have caused. We're going to use that gently here, but certainly is how they're thinking.
Yeah. And your sponsor is now potentially on the defensive and under the microscope because they're going to have to report what's going on with your project to maybe their managers and their customers. They have provided trust in you as their project manager to deliver. Your project has in some way perhaps terribly failed. And so now they have to go and deliver this message to their teams, to their management, partners, suppliers, and they will need talking points. And that's where you can help them out.
Exactly. And this is what you need to do for them with those talking points. Give them the headline. A headline is the essential pieces of your message, the bottom line about how they should interpret a situation. And this headline should not be something that goes into all of the background that gives you the words that would be here. This headline needs to be extremely specific about what is wrong, what the impacts are, and if you have it at the time, the plan to fix it.
That's right. And make sure that you give it to them in language that's important to them. They don't care about the number of phone lines or the state of the phone line or technical details of the server. They have certain metrics, certain things that they're measured on that they will get in trouble for, maybe. And you need to speak to those particular items and those pain points in your headline.
Exactly. They could be expecting a call from their leadership, their bosses, a C-level person, the CEO, if it's bad enough. So they need to be able to respond to that CEO who is going to want a very specific answer about what is wrong and how long it's going to take to fix it. So when you speak to them, be thinking like you are under that same amount of pressure, which you already are, but to give you more context around how to frame that language back out, the best way to represent and restore that confidence for your team is to come in strong with a strong headline that shows that you have ownership and understanding of the problem at hand.
And you need to give them a plan too. You need to say, this is where we are and this is the next thing we're going to do and the thing after that.
Exactly.
Of course, you don't always know that. Like in this case, I don't know what we're going to do. We're trying to figure out, and that's okay. That could well be and probably may be your situation. You won't have the whole plan the first time that you have to communicate to your executive management. And that's okay. If you don't have a plan, then what you do is you give them a timeline.
And a small timeline, days, weeks, months. This is probably in the somewhere between 5 minutes to 30 minutes chunks of time because they're so worried about the issue that is at hand.
And that depends on how critical the issue is. But say, I don't have an answer for you right now. Here's what I'm going to do. In 30 minutes, I will talk to you again and I will give you an update. I might not have a resolution for you. I might not have an answer, but I'll tell you where we are. And that kind of responsiveness helps to start rebuild some of that trust and build some predictability back into your project.
Yes. So if we go back to the fishbowl, you've had 5 glorious minutes to look into your problem. What happened next?
Yes, I think Marco must have worn off his keys when he was trying to figure out what was going on with the system. But yeah, so the executives came back in and I said, look, here is exactly what's going on. And I gave them a headline and I stuck exactly to the facts because I didn't know a lot. I said, right now the situation is that for some reason that we do not understand, almost all the phone lines in your call center are locked. You can never either place a new phone call or receive a new phone call from your hundreds of thousands of customers or millions of, I don't know, your many, many customers. You cannot receive a single phone call from them. I said there were maybe a half a dozen phone calls that were still ongoing, and we could see just a few phone calls that were still going. And I said, they're going to be fine until they hang up, and then we think those phone lines are going to be locked too, and you cannot receive any more phone calls into your global bank, which, they weren't really happy about.
But it was clear. They clearly understood exactly what was happening.
And they knew the exact impact to them and the things that were important to them as managers. And then I said, here's my plan. Here is what we need to do next, and here's how you're going to be affected by it. And in that, I don't want to get technical, but in that configuration, we had a failover system. So we basically had 2 whole phone systems, and we had virtually a big red button. And when you hit the big red button, it shuts down one server and brings up the other one. And hopefully, when the new one comes back up, you can start receiving phone calls again. And I said, we can do that, but when I push that big red button, any phone calls, like those 4 or 5 that were still ongoing, they'll be disconnected. I said, so I gave them the decision. I said, do you want me to push the big red button and do this failover so you can start making phone calls again? I said, I recommend it, but I need you to tell me if that's what you want to do.
Exciting cliffhanger. So you've hit a major decision point in your crisis that we're talking about today. And I want to talk about and share with you what's important for us to do as project managers in those decision moments. One of the critical things for you to do whenever you are in a crisis moment is get your documentation in order. You want to establish both a communication cadence and where your document repositories are for documenting this specific issue. What we would recommend is that you bring up a brand new RAID log specific to this issue. And in the example here for hitting the big red switch, you want to make sure that you're able to document those decisions. It's kind of an unfortunate truth about crisis moments that ultimately later you're going to look at this with 2020 hindsight. And you want to make sure that hindsight is accurately 2020. You want to make sure that everybody understands what decisions you were trying to make, what information you had at the time, and who was in the room and who approved it whenever you made that decision. So a RAID log is an excellent tool to leverage to capture that type of information. And remember that you're going to be put under a microscope later, so you want to do this in the interest of clarity for yourself and for your teams when you review this in the future.
Right, because when you hit that big red button, if everything goes well, then it's forgotten. Nobody will probably think about that particular moment again. There'll be other moments they think a lot about, but maybe not that one. But if you hit the big red button and it doesn't go to plan, then, and you know at some point somebody's going to say, who said you could touch that big red button? When did you do it? Why did you do it? Who said you could do that? And that's what you need to start recording as you go through that process.
Exactly. So leverage your RAID log. Hopefully all of you here know this. Normally we'd say, we'll put the link in the show notes. So we'll see if we can get you a link to a RAID log if you don't have one. But RAID logs are critical for situations like this.
Right. And now we start talking about the plan to resolve, to bring back trust as well as get our problem solved. And a lot of this is about getting predictable, because what just happened is probably not something you predicted. If it is, then I guess you wouldn't be here. But you want to get back into a track where you are predictable for your customers, for your project team, and for yourself in the project.
Exactly.
Right. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about on our episode is a concept that we came up with called trust bricks. And a trust brick, it's a brick of trust, a single module of trust.
A unit of trust.
A unit of trust, the atom of trust. But when you think of building trust, it's not something that just happens at once. It is something where you are predictable. You say you're going to do something, and you do it. I say I'm going to give you meeting minutes, and I give you meeting minutes.
Exactly.
I say I'm going to deliver something, and I deliver it over and over and over again. And that's how we build trust. And just like a brick wall, if you have a lot of bricks and a couple bricks crack
Or fail.
all the lights turn red on the brick, and nobody can take phone calls in the brick, it's okay. You still have the integrity of the wall. You still have a lot of things that have gone into building that trust. But if you have just one brick, you haven't put in the time, you haven't put in those transactions and done the work to build trust. If you have a wall made out of one giant brick and that brick breaks, well, you have no integrity in your wall anymore.
Yeah, you can think about this, and I know we all know this person, right? I'm going to name two people here. We're all familiar with at least one person who's extremely dependable. We have that project resource that we love working with, and I'm going to name her Priya. Priya always gets you the deliverables that you talked about. She shows up to every meeting. If she can't make it, she communicates why. She's predictable. We love Priya. I wish Priya was on every project. And then we also have a fictional character we reference on our podcast called Todd G, who we like to blame everything on.
Yep.
And Todd G is somebody who, I've got it, don't talk to me. I don't want to give you answers to your deadlines, and also I'm right. And so we have somebody who does not follow up on the deliverable dates they've committed to, often is late, requires constant hounding. And if you think about the difference between these two people, right? Todd, who is somebody who's more than once caused something to either be extremely stressful or come in at the last moment. And then we have Priya, who's always reliable, predictable. You know she's going to get the work done. Priya's laid dozens of trust bricks with you. And Todd has laid maybe 3. And if Todd's 2 trust bricks break, then we're furious with Todd G all over again. And so when you think about those things, we're trying to help you be Priya in this situation. And you do that through those small actions over and over again that build that trust back up as you're working through your crisis moment.
Yes, and you probably know your own Priyas, people that you work with that are constantly meeting your expectations. And so if something goes wrong, they miss something, cognitively, you think, oh, well, that was just a one-off. I know I can trust them. This is just a one-off because I've been working with them and they're always delivering.
Exactly. Okay, so last we left off in the fishbowl, we were going to hit that big red switch.
Yes, I laid it out for the executives. I said, here's the decision you need to make. And they said, do it. So it wasn't actually a big red button, but we hit the key to do the failover. And we waited. We waited. I don't know if we breathed in that point.
Understandable.
And then on the display board, I saw a green light. Boop.
Okay.
Another one. Boop, boop, boop. All the lights started to come green. Calls are coming in. We're through it.
You did breathe.
We did finally breathe. So we turned it on. And so then, now I went to the executive and said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep monitoring the situation. Our engineer Marco is going to keep studying what went wrong, collecting logs, sending back to the support team so that we can stay on top of it. And like we talked about earlier, I didn't have a plan. So I said, in 30 minutes, I will give you an update. I don't know if I'll have news for you or a resolution, but I will come back to you in 30 minutes. And you know what I did in 30 minutes?
Gave him an update.
I gave them an update in 30 minutes. They were anxiously awaiting that update.
Oh, yeah.
And then I didn't have really any news for them. And I said, in the next 30 minutes, I will come back to you because we were continuing to investigate. And this went on most of the day. And so we kept diagnosing. We worked with our remote support with the development team to try to understand what was going on. And finally, the engineering team came back and said, I think we have the problem. We'll send you a hot fix and you can install it tonight.
Yes.
And it was so happy. I was so happy to give that update. Said, we have a hot fix. The engineers think they understand what's going on. We're going to apply the hot fix tonight at midnight when all the phone lines are shut off. Mm-hmm. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to come back and we're going to monitor and make sure that solved the problem.
Okay. And how was that received?
Cautiously optimistic.
Good.
It was nice. We had a plan. We told them we had a resolution. So they were relieved that we had something. Still not happy, but glad that we had it resolved. And so the next morning, we came in. Again, we were there earlier, still in the fishbowl.
Yeah.
I could see the call center agents coming in. They weren't as happy this time. They were kind of looking at us as through the fishbowl wall. And they settled in, and again, we saw the phone calls coming in. Okay, good. Phone calls are coming in. People answering the phone calls, green lights. I think we made it through it. Boop, red light.
No.
Red light. Brrr, exact same thing happened.
No.
I just wanted to cry. I don't know if I wanted to cry or run, but I was in the fishbowl. I was stuck there. The problem happened again. And so again, I saw people coming up out of their seats. Executives come in. I had to say the same thing. Don't know what happened. I think we should do another switch over. They'd seen it before. They said, go ahead and do the switch over. Hit the big red switch.
A second time,
which you're almost never supposed to do. Lights came back up green, and now we're in full-on panic mode trying to figure out what the problem was.
And I think whenever you told me this, one of the things that happened is that they sent somebody from headquarters to work with you?
Yes. After the second time it happened, I'm sure that there were plenty of choice words from the bank's executive management to our executive management. And so they started putting on managers and engineers on planes to get there that day. Straight away, they were in the office with us on the customer site trying to help us figure out what was going on.
Oh, the problem continues.
Yeah.
It's always rough whenever that happens. You feel as though you've gotten the solve, and everyone is confident in the solve usually. And I think here it's important for us to remember as project managers that we're the arbiters of how that success is communicated. So when it comes to those solutions that we're very confident in, it's important to neither over nor under promise. You want to deliver the facts.
Right. So fortunately, when I told them we had a hot fix, I didn't say, no worries, this is going to fix everything. Everything's going to be perfect. Don't worry about it. Trust me, it'll be fine. That would have even been worse.
Exactly.
It still was not good, but I was pretty straightforward about we think we know what the problem is and we're going to implement this fix.
Would you say you were like Spock?
I was. And I think that's a good way to be, is when you're in this mode, you're trying to help diagnose a problem. Your customers are almost like your patients. Mm-hmm. And so like Spock from Star Trek or like a doctor, you need to be very prescriptive and very factual and say, look, there are treatments and likely outcomes, but nothing is guaranteed. And that's hard to do because you want to guarantee in life at that point. I want to know that this is going to work. And our wanting it so bad can project itself into overcommitment very, very easily.
And we know that you might have those managers that are like, promise me this works. It has to work. The answer must be yes, and the confidence must be 100%. It's very important that you maintain that leadership in this moment. And you do go back to that Spock-like or doctor-like persona where you're able to remind them, we're very confident that this is the solution. However, we acknowledge that we'll need to test this and run it through our test channels like we normally do, or our test platforms, to then validate that confidence before we roll it out. Here, you want to make sure that you are communicating that leadership, confidence, and calm, and letting them believe that we can take the time to work through this problem together, and we don't have to rush to a solution. We can work through what we're working on.
Exactly. And in this example, I was talking about oversight. And oversight can come on when you've got a really bad critical situation like this.
Yeah.
And you can start to get people interjecting themselves into your project at this stage, which can be a little uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I think in your situation, I think somebody was coming in, they trusted you, but they wanted to bring in somebody who had the same mindset as that executive sponsor of the project. And it's challenging, and I think it's tough here, but we're trying to see it from both sides of the story. You, project management mode, are in the weeds. You are trying to make sure that whatever issue is happening, that you ask every question about every possible outcome, that you've considered every angle, so you're in the weeds. If you get executive oversight that comes in, at times they can just be there because they can represent your managers or superiors or sponsors from that executive presence mindset of, yes, it's okay if we spend $100,000 to fix this because it costs us $500,000 to be down another minute or whatever is happening in your particular scenario. So sometimes oversight is just there to provide a direct link to the folks who are counting on you to get this done. And it's not something you should necessarily take personally. You should leverage them as part of help, as part of your support network as you work through this issue.
That's right. It can feel like it's adding a little more stress for you in this already
Extremely stressful.
Slightly stressful situation. But one of the things that we advise is put them to work. Put your sponsors, your executives to work. In this case, Hans was my executive sponsor who came in and got directly involved. And it was stressful to have him there. But when I realized that I had somebody there that was trying to try to help manage the customer, with my knowledge of the customer, I was able to put Hans to work. Say, Hans, I think it would be good if you went and had coffee with this person, or go have a conversation here, or I'm not getting a response from this support person. Can you make some phone calls and get them to respond to us? So what you want to do, instead of feeling stressed out or threatened by that, is put those resources to work for you, because that's what they're there for. They're for to help you.
Yeah, you're not on it alone, right? If you have folks there with you to help you, they can help you. And I do say that and acknowledge that sometimes you do feel alone, which is awful. At times, there can be a crisis you're experiencing where you feel marooned, alone on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and you're the only one with a bucket and nobody's there to help. It's horrible to be marooned in a crisis.
It really is. And sometimes you're physically alone. You're maybe on a customer site, or maybe you're home working on a Zoom, and you're literally physically isolated. And that can be even worse than having too much oversight and support, because sometimes your support structure just doesn't understand what's going on. They don't understand the gravity of the situation. And if this happens, one of the things we might recommend is really check your headlines. We talked about headlines earlier. Go back and check what the message is that you're trying to use to communicate to those executive sponsors and support structure.
Exactly. You want to know your audience. We've referenced a couple times it costing a certain amount of money to be down, or some other type of, you lose customers, some critical KPI or OKRs that you are measured by. You want to check your headlines and make sure that for whatever your bosses are measured by, whatever the success criteria of your project, you are able to speak to that outcome or impact when you're communicating out. And make sure that you speak that in plain language, right? Kim's example earlier, calls cannot come in, that is plain language. Anybody can understand the calls can't come in. If you say something like, currently, the system is experiencing interference between our phone lines and the phone lines of customers. That it's unclear what that means. Is there static on the line? Can nobody call in? Is this a weird space robot thing that's happening? Right? You want them to know exactly what's going on with your project. So make sure that in as plain language as you can, with the metrics you care about, you craft your headlines in that way, and see if you can't get some support by changing around the language that you're using when you're giving status updates.
Right. And in our case, when Hans understood that one of our biggest customers was down because of our platform, there was no hesitation, and he was out there to help support us.
All right, so let's go back to your fishbowl. Did you get that issue resolved?
Yeah, so we went down the second time. Executives and engineers fly in. Intensive work all day. It felt like multiple days, but it was all compressed into a single day. And yet again, engineering came back and said, I think we know the problem. We have another hot fix for you.
Okay, another hot
fix. All right, so they gave us a hot fix. And again, we were keeping up our communication cadence with the customer. It was not 30 minutes anymore, but it was very regular. And we told them, here's the situation. Engineers think they have now really found the problem, and we have another hot fix. They're very confident that this will resolve it. So we would like to install that tonight. And tomorrow, we will be here to support you just in case it's not.
Great. How did it go in the morning?
So we stayed up late, implemented the hotfix. Next morning, people didn't even look in the fishbowl anymore.
They were just disappointed in you?
They were just disappointed. I think one of the executives is probably sitting in the fishbowl with us at this point.
Definitely.
So quarters were getting pretty close. And we started taking phone calls. All the lights went green, and we waited. No red lights.
Ooh.
We waited. Oh, wait a minute. Nope, no red lights.
Ooh.
And we made it. So fortunately, we made it through the morning. We kept monitoring it closely. The next morning, again, we went in the morning, watched it, and no problem. So that solved the problem for us, and we were out of the immediate crisis at least. So that was good.
Definitely. And I think whenever you leave the immediate crisis and you actually finally truly exhale all of the stress and burdens you've been carrying for the past however many hours and sleepless nights, the first thing you think is, how do I never do this again?
Which is what you're thinking as you're crying into your pillow at the Hilton that night and most of the nights after a disaster like that. Yeah, and in this case, I don't know how we could have avoided it. There were maybe some unpredictable things there, but most of the time, when you have a project crisis, there were warning signs. There were yellow lights, which is something we talk about on our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And yellow lights, it's a concept. It's not actually one we came up with, but one we love. It was in a book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play by Mahan Khalsa.
Mm-hmm.
Great book. And he talks about this concept of yellow lights. And the concept is this. So when you're driving down the road in your car
Mm-hmm.
and you're coming up on an intersection, you see a yellow light, what do?
Floor it.
Floor it. Want to get through that yellow light. I don't want it to stop me. I just want to keep on going.
No, thank you.
The same thing happens in our projects. We're working, we're doing our thing in our projects, and we see something weird that happens. Like, oh, well, that's weird. I didn't expect us to fail that test. Or, oh, I thought those tasks would be done by now. But then, just like when we're driving, we think, nah, we'll be fine. We're focused on the end. We'll get to the end. It'll work itself out. And we just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the yellow lights. But the problem with yellow lights is maybe sometimes you'll get through the intersection. Sometimes you're going to get smashed in the little bitty pieces. And this is what can happen with our projects. And so the idea with yellow lights is if you're in your project and something weird happens, don't try to blow through that intersection. Stop. Say, what is this thing? Why are we getting this wrong? Why do we see this funny little light? Or why does this bother me? There's some little voice in the back of my head that says, there's something weird here. You should stop, investigate, and listen to that.
Exactly. You know, when Kim and I were building this talk for you wonderful listeners today, we first mentioned the famous line from A New Hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi saying, "That's no moon." And I went back and rewatched that scene to see what we could pull from that for this talk. And so I'm going to go into some Star Wars nerddom because it wouldn't be a PM Happy Hour thing if we didn't talk about Star Wars at least once in the entire talk or episode that we have. So in this scene, the gang, Luke, Han, Obi-Wan, Chewbacca, R2-D2, and C-3PO have just jumped out of hyperspace to arrive at Alderaan, and they land in an asteroid field. Luke says to Han, "Where's Alderaan?" And Luke says, "I don't know what to tell you, kid. This is an asteroid field, but we're at the Alderaan coordinates." So
it's not there.
It's not there. There's no Alderaan. I know what to tell you, kid. Second thing, they see a TIE fighter, which is a short-range ship that has to have a big base nearby, like a Star Destroyer or another giant Empire ship. That it needs to be close to that. And they go, "Oh, look at that TIE fighter. It's not here for long." And they go to chase the TIE fighter. And then Luke says, "Oh, look, it's going towards that small moon." And finally, Obi-Wan Kenobi says, "That's no moon." And then they are pulled in by tractor beam inside the Death Star. And when I rewatched it, I thought, this is hilarious. There are several yellow light moments in front of them before they get drug in by the Death Star. One, where they have landed, which is the correct intergalactic coordinates for Alderaan, shows no Alderaan. Two, what is there is a bunch of rock debris, which could be from a planet. Three, they see a short-range ship and don't see its mothership and say, "It's all right, we'll just chase it down." And then finally, they notice that's not a moon that tiny little TIE fighter is flying towards. From all of these yellow lights, they never stop to think, this is bad, boys. We should leave. And I share this story with you now, hopefully so that in hindsight you can realize that you too have had a "that's no moon" moment, but potentially you also had some yellow lights beforehand that indicated the situation.
it happens a lot in projects, far too often. We got to the end of user testing and they're not done testing. They found a bunch of problems, but they still want to go live anyway. No, that's what you just saw was alderaan dust floating in your hair. It's time to stop, rethink what we're doing before we get into crisis mode.
Exactly. Anytime you feel like that's odd, why would there be rocks here? Weird. There's a person patrolling our project site, and we haven't got all our safety things. I know that inside yet, right? You wanna raise those risks appropriately. You can leverage your RAID log, your steer co, various other processes, so that you can try to avoid this in the future. So keep your eye out for yellow lights and errant asteroid fields.
Listen to that little voice that says, "I think there might be something wrong here," because it's probably right.
Yeah. And what I'll say to some of our more junior listeners, you build it up with time. The longer you've been doing this, the louder and more confident that little voice gets.
Absolutely. And when you get to the end of your crisis, when it does happen, you might think, well, we've just had this terrible crisis. I took down the entire call center or whatever your personal disaster is. And you might think, well, that's it. It's over. We're kicked out. There's no more going forward with this customer. It's done. What's interesting is that is certainly not always the case. And in fact, if you do it right and come out of your crisis the right way, you manage it, you can come out stronger with a relationship than when you went in.
One of my favorite examples about this is from the Work Life podcast by Adam Grant. He talks about how whenever NASA wants to build teams to go on international space stations together, they don't do team building exercises like the ones I strongly dislike, which are happy hours or otherwise, which is funny because our podcast is called PM Happy Hour. I love it with people I know and love. It's hard for me to get to know people at a happy hour otherwise. But they go on a hiking adventure. And I'm going to use adventure in the strongest term here because they send the team out with a guide. And the guide's job is not to help them have a fun hiking trip. The guide's job is to make sure that they don't die. But in terms of risks and choices in hiking and being outside and just surviving in the wilderness, there's like a broad spectrum of choices you could make. And I think the ones that can kill you are this small. And then there's this large spectrum of just non-optimal choices that will get you into hard situations you can live through. And the point of the trip is to live through those tough choices together, to experience tough emotions under pressure, to see how you can count on people in times where you feel like, or maybe literally are, depending on each other to live. And those experiences of, I just slipped and sprained my ankle. My friend or coworker just gave me a splint on my leg to help me get through it, or made a poultice, right? They helped me through this difficult time. Now I know that whenever I'm on the space station and we won't have a guide, we're in space, I'll be able to count on that person to handle whatever needs to be handled in that moment. And we can even let go of any preconceived notions around, oh, I don't know if I can trust you, because they've experienced the biggest trust building exercise ever. Do you have my life?
Right. And for project crises, this is also that same kind of an event, a stressful event, where we can come out stronger with a relationship, although maybe not a good reason to have a crisis in your project, but it certainly can come out that way. And that's what happened with our Fishbowl example. So we surprisingly ended up with a better relationship than we went into because we followed the same steps that we talked about today.
You can handle yourself, 1. State the facts, 2. Communicate in headlines, that's number 3. And be predictable, 4. What happens when you do these 4 things as a result of a terrible crisis, and this is the mode you jump into, they gain the confidence that you could help them through any disaster, not just this one.
And you get more confidence in yourself too.
Absolutely.
For handling disasters.
Yeah. Once you live through a terrible experience, I've had things happen to me like losing entire databases full of our content. And it was HIPAA data, so there was only a certain way we could get it back. That was my own nightmare. Over time you go, I got this, right? We can live to see another day. And from that, I think I can say that your response to these crisis moments is career defining.
We may not want these kinds of crises to happen, but when they do happen, it is our chance to shine as leaders.
That's our talk. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. You can catch more of Kim and myself on the Project Management Happy Hour podcast, PM Happy Hour, wherever you get your podcast.
Cheers.
Cheers.